We would like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our participants, wherever you are joining us from. I would like to acknowledge that I am coming to you from Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories, which is the traditional territory of the Yellowknife's Dene First Nation, Chief Daragi's territory, and the traditional territory of the North Slave Métis. I'm very grateful and thankful that we are able to be on this land and use the water. I'm with the Extractive Resource Governance Program of the University of Calgary School of Public Policy. Our program has the mandate to work with organizations to develop capacity to undertake resource development in a sustainable and responsible way. And it's in that context today that we bring you today's webinar, Pipelines and Indigenous People, from Opposition to Opportunity. The topic obviously fits well within our mandate as Canada looks towards truth and reconciliation and engaging Indigenous people in a significant and substantive way in resource development. I'm delighted today to have Dr. Heather Exner-Perot with us today to chair a panel of senior Indigenous leaders to share their views and perspectives. And I do thank today's panel of Indigenous leaders for joining us today. A bit about Dr. Exner-Perot. She has over 15 years experience in Indigenous and Northern economic development, governance, health, and post-secondary education. She's published and or presented on Indigenous economic and resource development, urban reserves, telehealth, Indigenous workforce development, First Nations taxation, and own source revenues, among other things. I'm delighted to say that she is one of University of Calgary's own, having obtained her PhD in political science from the University of Calgary in 2011. And since then, she's held various positions at the International Centre for Northern Governance and Development at the University of Saskatchewan. She's also a fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute of Ottawa and a global fellow at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. With that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Exner-Perot. Thank you, Heather.
Great, thanks so much for the introduction, Deborah. And welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to be here, and I'm coming to you from the Tsuut'ina Nation territory. Very excited to host this panel, and very excited that so many top leaders, Indigenous leaders, have agreed to speak with us today. I think everyone knows that pipelines has become a very polarizing issue in this country. Everyone has an opinion, and it's becoming a lightning rod for various perspectives. And amidst all that, I think often the Indigenous perspective, the perspective of Indigenous communities who are actually involved in pipelines often gets represented or misrepresented and misconstrued, and is thought it was very important to provide that unfiltered perspective and provide these leaders with their own opportunity without, coming from a media lens or industry or government or activists, to hear from them on, what are the considerations, how they make the decision to engage in pipelines, what they see as the risks and the benefits, and what it means for their communities. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our excellent speakers today. Our first is Chief Michael Laborde, who is the chief of the Whispering Pines Clinton Indian Band, which is part of the Shuswap Nation in BC. He's also chaired the Western Indigenous Pipeline Group, which is seeking to purchase TMX. Our next speaker will be Chief Evan Tapotat, the chief of Kakowistihau First Nation in Treaty 4 in southern Saskatchewan, and his community has been involved in the construction of Line 3. We also have my friend, Councillor Karen Ogun-Taves, councillor with Wet'suwet'en First Nation. Karen is also the CEO of the First Nations LNG Alliance, which is a collective of First Nations who are participating in and supportive of sustainable LNG development in BC. And her community has been involved in building Coastal GasLink pipeline. And finally, Chief Alvin Francis, the chief of Nekanit First Nation, also in Treaty 4 in Southern Saskatchewan. And Chief Francis is the chair of Natural Law Energy, which is a Treaty Alliance of First Nations, which had negotiated an equity stake in Keystone XL. So all these leaders will provide their own perspectives on their experience with their pipelines, the considerations their communities made to get involved, and some of the best practices and lessons learned they've learned through that. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask each leader to have a short opening statement of about 5 minutes, and then we'll get into some questions that I prepared for them. And then I'm going to open it up to the entire audience through the Q&A, and I'll select and moderate those questions. So Chief Laborde, if you don't mind starting with you, if you just want to start us off and introduce yourself and describe how your nation got involved with TMX and what the kind of considerations, decision behind that looked like.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you, Deborah, for the invitation. I really appreciate it. How we got here is quite simple. In 2007, Ian Anderson from then Kinder Morgan came to our community, and he said he was going to put a pump station on our reserve. And I looked at him and I said, "I'm the chief here, so what are you talking about?" And so that precipitated a lengthy discussion onto how we were going to twin the pipeline and what kind of equity would be forthcoming. Now, Kinder Morgan really resisted, and I wrote Jim Flaherty, I wrote Joe Oliver, all of them trying to get either equity or taxation, because we weren't opposed to pipelines, we were opposed to not being included. And so that's what precipitated this whole mutual benefits agreement, and that would see us secure jobs, revenue, and that kind of thing. The most important thing to First Nations in any infrastructure or mega project is the environment, period. All right. If it's going to wreck the environment, we don't want nothing to do with it. If you can't rehabilitate it, we don't want nothing to do with it. If you can't fix it and make it as good as it was, we don't want nothing to do with it. And so that's what we took great lengths to go with Kinder Morgan and Canada, national energy boards, and come to an agreement where our community voted on it and supported it 100%, which was a little surprising to me. Our comfort level with working with oil companies and pipeline companies and their environmental standards was very high. And so that's what led us to getting into an agreement with them when it came to jobs and environmental oversight. So with that, since Kinder Morgan has moved back to Texas, we've moved into that space where we're going to buy the pipeline. And so we've brought together 5 distinct regions, you know, the prairies, the North Thompson Valley, which I live in, the Nicola Valley, Fraser Valley, and the Salish Sea. And so each of those 5 regions will have directors. There'll be directors from the Métis of British Columbia, the Métis of Alberta. So 12 directors, and we have partnered with a tier 1 pipeline operator, and we're going to be making a bid to purchase the whole line so that we can enjoy the equity that Canada hasn't enjoyed for 70 years. You know, we would like to enjoy it for 70 years. And most importantly, to have that environmental oversight instilled in day-to-day operations. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you so much, Chief. You make such an important point that, and it's been my experience that many First Nations are not opposed to development, but they're opposed to not being included. And that's such an important distinction that has really been lost in kind of the black and white, you know, tone that the discussion has taken. Chief Tapatat, I'm going to turn it over to you next to talk about your participation with Line 3.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to bring greetings from my membership. We have 2,250 approximate members of Kakwi-Style First Nation. We're southeast of Regina, just off the Trans-Canada Highway here. And as Chief Michael alluded to, it's pretty flat. It's kind of boring over here. He's a rodeo guy. But I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. We supposedly have approximately 350 people watching, and just want to bring greetings upon my people, and thank you for the invite to Heather. Heather's been kind of instrumental in ensuring that I got on here and told the story of Kakwi-Style. So for us, a little bit about Kakwi-Style and how we got involved. So everybody knows that Line 3 was built in 1968. At the time, I don't think our First Nations people knew. It wasn't even a thought at the time to include them. And we were elected in 2017 with the 4 councillors that I sit with. And Line 3 was going to be running through our traditional territory, just south of us, about 40 kilometers, pretty quick. So we had to react really fast. I went from being a principal, worrying about lesson plans and unit plans, to worrying about pipelines and economic development pretty darn quick in my learning curve. So we approached Enbridge and said we want to make sure that the benefits that come with Line 3 going through our territory are fair and honest, and things worked out for the better. It wasn't always an easy road, and a lot of discussion, a lot of trips to Calgary, a lot of trips to Kakwa for Enbridge. But at the end of the day, I think we found a happy medium. But as Chief Michael alluded to, we were never opposed to the pipeline, but we're opposed to just not being at the table. We have to be at the table. Anyone out there that wants to do work within Canada have to understand that narrative and understand that angle. For 7 generations, our people have tried to get their foot in the door, and now we're in the year 2021, and to come in and do business in Canada without the Indigenous involvement it's not going to fly. It's not going to work. Myself, Chief Michael, Chief Alvin, Councillor Karen, we're pretty strong-minded people. Go and try and tell us that it's not going to happen, and you'll see what will happen, right? So we want to be at the table. We come with an open hand, willingness to learn, good hearts, and we want to be rich with opportunity, just like everybody else. And so with that, I'll leave that there. Thanks for the invite, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you now to talk about your experience with CGL and with LNG in BC.
Deneza Tsakoze Skyze. Snakalia to the Stolo Nation for allowing me to reside on their unceded territory. Sai Sozi Karen Ogan, Sanate Nakwaon Sophie Ogan, Spape Mitch Ogan Satnian, Seats Satsan Patty Isaac Satnian, To Nakwaon Julie Isaac Satnian, Deesda Gadimden. I have practiced social work for my people for over 25 years. Received my bachelor's and master's in social work while working and parenting my 2 children on my own. I moved home after 20 years to take a year off of work. My mom asked me to run for chief in 2010. I said yes, because you don't say no to mama. I got in by 1 vote. I served 2 3-year terms from 2010 to 2016. We made huge strides for our community. We built a health center, hall, had our first totem pole raising ceremony, built an administration, education, and training center, a Head Start daycare, and we were able to get our economic development business arm up and running. We started a natural resource department, policies and business arm, governance manual. We did our negotiations with government and industry. We made several attempts to sit with our fellow Wet'suwet'en and OW hereditary chiefs. We moved some mountains in our 6-year term. We made history for our community. Our nation signed a Pacific Trails pipeline agreement in 2009 before my term. We signed our LNG agreement with Coastal GasLink and with the province of BC during my term as chief, with much controversy and backlash. I'm the current CEO and founder of the First Nations LNG Alliance since 2015. We wanted to educate and make the general public aware of what LNG was and what it means to Indigenous communities who want to support responsible LNG projects and make their own informed decision on whether they support these projects or not. I currently sit on council for my nation and hold the natural resources and economic development portfolios. Just to hinge off what Chief Mike Labordier said and Chief Evan was about not only having a seat at the table, but what is being served. And if what is being served is digestible, wholesome, and nutritious for us as Indigenous people, that's the question that we must be asking ourselves. Ms. Sai.
Thank you so much, Karen. And you mentioned controversy in Chief Chaput. You mentioned how strong-willed Indigenous leaders on this webinar and in general have to be. I find, it's been a surprise to me, maybe reflects, my privilege, but how easy it is we make it to say for First Nations to say no to development, and how hard we make it for First Nations to say yes to development in this country. So I greatly admire all of your courage, and certainly, Karen, you have demonstrated that in spades. And our last introduction then will be Chief Alvin Francis. If you can tell us a little bit about your Neck-and-Eat First Nation and how you got involved with Natural Law Energy and Keystone XL, Chief.
Okay, thank you. My community is in the southwest part of the province here of Saskatchewan. I'm actually 40 miles north of the Montana border, and I'm 40 miles east of the Alberta border, so right in the very corner. How I got started in with actually TC Energy is that when I first became the chief, I went to TC Energy and I went and sat down with them. I says, I thank you for everything that you have done. You have given us 50, 60 grand every year, and we were very appreciative of that. But I said, you know what? That pipeline is coming through my territory, my traditional territory. Now, okay, you guys, I'm very appreciative of everything that you have done. But that pipeline, how long is it going to run? 30, 40, 50 years? What I want from you is a life cycle agreement. First of all, they said, well, it's never been done before, Chief. Yeah, well, I said, well, here's what it is. I said, you know what? You hire the very smartest people. I know you do. Figure it out, because that's very important for us here in the Southwest, is to have a life cycle agreement, because we need to ensure that we're actually participating for the whole life cycle of that pipeline. As long as that oil is going through that pipeline, I want something from there. So it took a while. It took 2 years for them to come back to us and say, okay, here's what we have to offer. They offered $1 billion in equity. And then there's another 900 million with TC Energy, with a good partnership that we've managed to achieve, so that we can actually participate into the future with green energy, whether it be solar or wind or cogeneration plants within the existing pipelines. And that's what we're after, is to make sure that as long as that oil is flowing through those pipelines, we are in participation of that. Because I've asked them too, okay, now you tell me, how much have you made from First Nations land? Because is it $1 billion? Is it $1 trillion? Now it's time to start giving back to First Nation, because the stories that we are told by our ancestors is to maintain that right. We have done our part. We signed treaty. It's time to start giving back to First Nations people, because that's the most important part, is the storytelling of our people telling us, as the leader now of Niigaaniit, is to remember these stories and keep insisting that this land is still ours, will always be ours, because we shared. When we shared, we signed treaties. That's between two governments. We are still a form of government, and we still have a say on everyday matters. So when that is something that is very important to our people, we have to maintain that on whatever we're going to do for business. We must maintain that, because it's important that we fight for the future generations of our people, to make sure that they earn what has been traded already in treaty. We have to ensure that we've got to make sure we get our fair share now, because the way I look at this is in a modern form of the NRTA, the National Resource Transfer Agreement. They will not owe up to that. So it's upon every individual First Nation to enact that themselves, because that's a federal law, National Resource Transfer Agreement. Now, I think it's upon every one of us First Nations. Now, if we were to band together to ensure that the federal government hears us and we say, this is still ours. If we could band together and say, let's make these major projects so that we fight to continue to fight for those youth and the next generations, to create intergenerational wealth. That is what needs achieved here. Because I met with the National Energy Board one time. I said, why isn't there a First Nations tax on the National Energy Board? Because we are 50 years, 60 years behind on what we say regular society beyond the borders of my First Nation. We are 50, 60 years behind. Now we have to find a way so we can catch up. This does probably their best. I always think they're doing their best for us to give us what we can to encourage our youth to get educated. Now, what we're looking for is just a little more piece of the pie to ensure that we can get every person that wants to be educated, get them that education. Because it's unfair that when I first got in, I had 24 people who wanted to go to university, but I could only fund 8. Now, that made me think out of the box. Now, what do I got to do for them to make sure that they can actually get educated? Because there's always a story out there within my First Nation that's been told. The team of horses dragging a wagon, that's us, non-First Nations and First Nations. Now, when one gets ahead of the other, that is not a good thing to see. They're not working together. They're out of sync. My uncle used to tell me, Lake Gordon Oaks, he says, get them in sync. Now, that is a beautiful thing to see. Make sure that the team of horses are in sync and they work together. That's what I'm trying to achieve here, to make sure that we are in sync and we've caught up to where we need to be. Because I always say we are still decades behind on whatever we're trying to achieve in economic development because of the procedures and the red tape that we have to fight to get economic development going on our First Nations. And these pipelines, this is the ending years of oil and gas, the next 20, 30, 40 years because of the next generation of creating power to generate power. Now we have to make use of what's coming out of the resources of Mother Earth. That's upon us now to make sure that we get the best deal for us as First Nations people. So I hope that we can bind together and make sure we can get the best deal for the next generation, to get them educated, provide those services that we lack on our First Nations. It's to make sure that, and natural law energy was based on that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Francis. I like your metaphor of everyone, pulling the wagon together and how bad it is for everyone when it gets out of sync. And I think, equity ownership has really come up in the last few years as kind of the new gold standard. And really that way, that's going to, I think, leapfrog some of those decades. Indigenous people get the kind of the rightful ownership and the rightful stake that they're entitled to. So thank you all so much for your introductions. We're going to move into a few questions that I prepared here to get your further insights. And the first is just going to be on the risks and the benefits that your communities, the kinds of decisions and the kinds of ways that you need to assess the risks and benefits when you enter into a major project. And for some of you, there are pipelines that already existed outside your reserve territory. And so it's a matter of kind of the parameters in which you would consent to that, the ways that you would benefit, the ways that you could mitigate the risks. But I think we need to lift the veil a little bit. I don't think the average Canadian has a very good understanding of decision-making processes in First Nations and the different, the steps and processes that you do to make those decisions. So I don't know who wants to go first. But the question is, how do you choose to be involved and what are the conditions under which you determine if you're going to be involved or not?
Thank you, Heather. It's just by the fact that we're here. We've been here since the ice melted. And we have a long history of oral history of stories on how the ice melted, how this river was formed, how the Fraser River was formed. When the fish started to come up, when the salmon started to come up. And so all these things are what is important to us. Our diet typically is, even though we're in the interior of British Columbia, our diet's probably 50% salmon because the salmon harvest starts in May when the Chinook and the spring salmon and the trout come. And then in August, September, October, the sockeye come. And so we're heavily dependent on that still because of, the lack of economic opportunities, the Indian Act, I'm sitting in a house that's owned by Justin Trudeau. I mean, I pay all the bills and I pay the insurance, but it's owned by Canada. It's crazy. Whenever people argue with me, I say, you want to trade houses? And they're quiet instantly. And so for us, I saw the question on what enhances the environment. First of all, we would like to know first, we get our news like everybody else in the news. And so when Trans Mountain or Kinder Morgan has an incident, we want to know. And so having a seat at the table with the operating partner gives us that understanding. More importantly, we want to know how it is they see protection of our waterways, our valleys. We did not believe that somebody living in Houston, Texas has our best interests at heart. Call us crazy, we didn't believe that. And so we would like to have this infrastructure looked after by the folks who bear the most risk. I live in the valley and the pipeline runs beside my house. And so I need that environmental oversight, and I'd like to be at the table making those environmental decisions on behalf of the environment, not necessarily what's good for the shareholder, because sometimes those aren't the same thing. So what we need to do is protect the environment. And once we do that, then you can start sharing in what the environment generates in the form of profit.
Thank you, Chief. Karen, how about yourself? What were some of the considerations that, the FNLNG Alliance and also your own nation took into account when you were negotiating?
Well, I think just to speak about the risks and the benefits, the political backlash that we received from day one when our nation signed our Coastal GasLink agreement. We were going upstream to a very fast current. In order to have some autonomy, own source revenue, and to assist with alleviating the poverty issues, we went out on a limb for industries just so we could get some relief in the community. When walking a new path, it is hard to gauge if you're doing the right thing. Our choices were, 1, either we maintain the status quo and keep things the way they are, or 2, find a new path forward economically to assist with our socioeconomic issues within our community. The benefits. History has taught us not to trust government or industry. Extraction of our natural resources off of our unceded territories and billions are made, but yet our people still live in poverty. We need to change that landscape. We may have signed project agreements that provide us with lump sum payouts for up to 25 years from government and industry. After some deep thought about the issue, the blockades from last year and the year before have taught us about the bigger picture about the title and rights of the unceded territory, especially for the Wet'suwet'en people. The Indian Act system has divided our people for too long. Although the Wet'suwet'en people are divided over this, there is nothing stopping us from coming back together. And when the Wet'suwet'en people get unified, we will be a force to be reckoned with. The blockades made history. It woke up Canada. More people are educated and aware about what it means to be Indigenous in Canada. It is showing Canada's skeleton in their closet. Indigenous people are resilient. A story that was once told to me on strength. When a bulldozer is going through a field and it runs over willow trees, after being run over, the willow springs back up. That is the strength and resiliency of Indigenous people.
Thank you very much for that, Karen. Tipatat, I'll go to you next. And how did you assess the risks and benefits, and how did your community, get involved in that decision making?
Well, I think the decision for myself, and first and foremost, I sit with 4 councillors who all have the same vision as myself. We know that our sovereignty lies in economic development. End of conversation. We're not going to wait for the government. We're not going to wait for Canada to plop down a bunch of millions of dollars so that we can look after ourselves and honor a treaty. They're not going to do that. They're going to do it to the lowest extent level that they can, and that's okay with them. But that's not okay with us. So we had a couple options there. We said, well, we can kick stones and feel sorry for ourselves, or we could actually shut up and do something about it, not blame anybody else. So that's what we did. So the 4 councillors I said with, Councillor Iris, Mike, William, and Corey, they have the same vision and the same goal that, how we get there, that's how we argue. That's what we have the good conversations about. But we know that where we want to go. That's sovereignty through economic development. So I'll tell you a story about a town that's close to us and why the decision was easy to get involved. So there's a town really close to us. They're non-Indigenous town, very much different skin color than mine, very much different religion, very much different lifestyle. And lifestyle that they have nice houses, they drive Range Rovers, they drive nice big SUVs, and they're different than us. And they're different than us because in that lifestyle, because they have a potash mine near them, a natural resource that's 40 kilometers away. They're so different than us. So they have so much opportunity. And then you drive over to our reserve 40 kilometers, just to the southwest, and you hit damn near third world conditions right here in the first world country. And we thought to ourselves, but we're the same as them. We want those memories in life. We want to live long, meaningful lives. Health is directly related to wealth. Everybody knows that. The richer we are, probably the better care that we have, medical care. But we want the same things. Like, we want to go to those graduations. We want to go to those weddings. We want to go to those anniversaries. And the people that live 40 kilometers away in that town want those same things. So we said, how the hell do we be like them in terms of opportunity, in terms of wealth? And that for us is natural resources, is the line 3, is potash. And I don't take a liking to people that come to our turf. A lot of non-Indigenous companies come to our turf, they roll through, they make their cash, they make a bunch of revenue, and then they're gone. And we're the ones left with all the long-lasting, lifelong effects of nothing really other than just a tainted environment. So we said, let's get involved. Let's stop feeling sorry for ourselves. Let's not wait for Justin Trudeau to come and all of a sudden plop down a bunch of money, and let's get involved. But like Councillor Karen said, with that comes threats, there comes death threats, there becomes lateral violence. Everybody wants new hockey equipment for their kid. Everybody wants dance lessons for their girls and boys, but they want to make sure that the environment is protected. And so for us, getting involved was easy. We want to be like that town near us, different color, different religion, different lifestyle, but same wants, same memories, same meaningful lives. So that's why, and that's how we got involved. But like I said, with it comes, it's a double-edged sword, right? A lot of our people want to, the water protectors, absolutely understand that water is life. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter that I would not, I'm going to be gone from this earth in 40 years. And she's got another 80 years left on this earth. And the last thing I'm going to do is go and get involved with something that wrecks our environment so that she can't have water. So like Chief Michael said, you see a common theme here, everybody. We stand with them, but we need to make sure that Indigenous involvement happens so that the environment is protected to our liking. Because at the end of the day, we're the ones left with the lifelong effects. So thank you.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you so much, Chief. And then finally, I'll end with you, Chief Francis, on your perspectives of, what were the risks and the benefits that your community evaluated, and how did you come to that decision to get involved with Keystone XL?
Well, for us here in the Southwest, really, it's our pristine water here, our spring water that we think about. And really the risk was that to make sure that when we get involved with a company such as TC Energy, is to ensure the best technology is out there to basically watch this pipeline if there's ever an eruption, to make sure that we are involved in that, and to make sure that they tell us exactly what is the technology that you're putting in there, and what is the coating, what is the thickness of everything. I too was a pipeline worker at one time, and I've seen it, and there was small issues, but as you learn working in the pipelines, you actually know what is actually the technology today that can actually enhance the use, and to make sure these pipelines never erupt in some way, or an accident that actually can form something hazardous to the environment. Because that's all we're trying to do, is make sure that we have a say on where and what is being involved in the building of a pipeline. That's what we always wanted to do, and we always wanted to say that, and we have. And now that we sit and we we actually meet with TC Energy just about on a weekly basis on any environmental, basically projects that are coming up, pipelines, green energy. We now have a say because they're finally listening, which is a great thing, because that's the most important thing. As long as we have partners who are willing to listen to each other and talk to each other in a well-mannered way, we can sit across from a table and say, okay, these are my ideas, these are your ideas. Okay, anybody that has saying that these are not very good projects, please get yourself invited, come and sit at the table, but please act like everybody else and say, this is what I would like to see. Because when you start yelling at each other, nobody hears that. Now, that's not the way to do business. We must be respectful to each other so that we can actually see and respect each other's views. Because I do believe the environmentalists actually have a great view. Maybe they have something that we don't know. So, but for me, it's always about making sure that we can be respectful and listen to each other when it comes down to these projects. It's a sit down and listen to each other to make sure that these projects move ahead in such a good way that they're actually successful for both parties. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And we're starting to get the theme, for this next question on, the many opinions that people have on pipelines. And that's been a surprise to me. And just being an observer, though, to see how many slings and arrows get thrown at chiefs and leaders and workers and business owners who are involved in the resource industry and who are Indigenous. On the one hand, you have one side saying, build your economy and get a job and kind of harsh things. And on the other hand, when people work at developing their own economy, rebuilding their economy after kind of colonial structures have taken that away, then people criticize the way you do that too. And so you're often left between a rock and a hard place. And I, with amongst my Indigenous colleagues, again, it's not, I'm just observing it, and I can't imagine how hard it is, to live it and to be that leader who has to, like Chief Chepatati said, faces death threats for participating in a resource development project that brings jobs and benefits to your communities. So I guess I wanted to ask you all and give you this opportunity to talk about how all these opinions and the activism and the way that people appropriate your voices, how this has impacted you or influenced your involvement in major projects.
I'll take a stab at that, Heather. Thanks for that question. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, and I always use this as a good bad example. I have 8 sisters. It's a lot of perfume and jewelry at Christmas, I know. But if you think they all agree on everything, I got some news for you. They don't. All right. People, to be quite honest and quite frank, we need the opposition, because I need to know if we're doing it right. They will always find the sore spots, the weak spots, all of it. They will find it for us. We don't have to look for it. They'll bring it to us. And we need that opposition. There's 2 sides to every pancake, no matter how thin it is. And so we need to address their concerns so that we can look after what those demons that live in their head. And so once we address those, we can go on and operate this pipeline safely. Thanks.
And you said your community had voted and reached 100% consensus. So it seems like maybe your 8 sisters could, maybe agree on something if you get your whole community to reach consensus on a pipeline.
Yeah, nobody was more surprised than me.
All right, thank you. Who wants to go next?
I can go next.
Thanks, Karen.
So I've been doing this work for over 8 years now. It started when I was in my 2nd term as chief of my nation. I had some choices: either play in the sandbox and get meager Indian Act contribution agreements, or explore and find opportunities to advance our nation. I took the latter. I had a few years as chief to make a mark in history for our people and make a difference. It means standing up against the flow. Even if that meant or felt like you were standing alone. Being misunderstood, being mistreated, and having to experience extreme lateral violence, I stood for our people. When our nation, our council, our hereditary chiefs, and our community stood with us, signed our provincial agreement, we were bullied, ostracized, all over social media. Even some of our own family members had nothing nice to say about us on social media. We persevered. I tell the story and remember it when I go through tough times. A few nights after we signed our agreement, a council member phoned me upset and crying. She said our members are being treated badly when they go to town. They get called nasty names. She asked me, did we do the right thing? I was saddened and disheartened by the story because some of those our people were the elders. I went to bed that night praying and asking God, did we do the right thing? It saddened me to hear how our people were being treated. I woke up the next morning with that assurance. I felt that we had to make a new path for our people and that we did the right thing for our people. I woke up with 100% assurance that yes, we are on a good path for our people. I have never looked back and never second guessed myself again.
I'm so glad to hear that, Karen, and I have so much respect and admiration for you and for all you leaders. So thank you for sharing that. Chief Tapetat?
I think I'm gonna, before I go into my little spiel here, I've been writing down some notes, and sometimes I think maybe I should have went ahead of Chief Michael because he steals my thunder every time. So I told you we're cut from the same cloth. He's just a couple years older than me, I think. So we're before I go into my answer, I just want to say I've been looking at the question, the Q&A there. I just want to say hi to Juan Dumas from South America. I don't know, I've never met anyone from South America. So Juan, thank you for joining in. He has a question there. I'm sure we'll get to it, but want to say hi to our friend from South America. I want to go back to this death threats part that I received when we stood up for Line 3 in Enbridge. You know, I have a lot of analogies, a lot of sayings I live by. One of them is stand for something or you'll fall for anything. And at that time, you know, geographically where we're situated, you know, Line 3 made sense to stand for because there's jobs, there was all sorts of jobs. But to get to the death threats part, you know, I'll say it now and I'll say it at the very end is I will take those death threats any day of the week, 24/7, as long as we can provide opportunity. We can get those jobs, we can do the opportunity, we can provide opportunity, we can provide opportunity. You know, people break the cycle. We all know the residential school effect. I was a product of the residential school. I went there from grade 7 to grade 11. So I certainly know. So when I was the principal of a school on the reserve year previous to being chief, I saw every day that what the residential school effect left. A lot of our homes are broken. And by that, I mean, a lot of our parents are lost. And in turn, their parents, because of that, their residential school effect, their parents were lost. Now these young kids that are in a school that will obviously become parents one day, and some of them are lost. And we have to figure out how the hell do we combat that, right? People think it's a make-believe thing, the residential school effect. It's very much alive in every community that have people that, you know, went to residential school. So we think about, so how do we combat that? And for us, it was, we get involved with you know, the economic spin-off to all of these big projects happening, whether they're in BC or Alberta, you know, wherever you, but for us, there's a lot of major projects happening right now in Saskatchewan, and we want to be a part of them. But you know, when we first started out, we were okay with the shovel in hand. Like, here's a shovel, give it to the Indian, let him go dig over there, and we'll give him $25 an hour. That was how we kind of started out. But then as we go on, we realize, holy heck, we're just as smart as these other guys in these management positions. And then as we kind of carried on, we're like, holy heck, we're just as smart as these guys that own businesses. So that's where we are today now. We're at the point now where we don't want just that shovel in hand job. We'll take them. Some of our people are happy with those jobs. They're good, hardworking, you know, Monday to Saturday, 8-10 hours, and they go and come back Monday to do it all over again. We'll take those jobs, but we want those management jobs. We want those ownership jobs. And I'll give you an example right now. So we have a band member by the name of Des Dumais, worked in oil and gas for all his life and never kind of really got the opportunity that his peers got. Smarter, probably not as good looking as some of them, but definitely smarter than a lot of his non-Indigenous peers. And today, it's grown to the fact where we have our own custom steel fabrication shop called Kahio Fabco. We're 100% Indigenous owned. We want to be a part of all these projects, and he's leading that for us. And we don't want to hand out. We don't. We want to hand out. And we want those contracts. We want those jobs. And when we do those jobs at Kahio Fabco for the custom steel fabrication, you're going to find that they're just as good as anyone else, despite our skin color. And that's kind of where we start out. And so if we can get Kahio Fabco off the ground and running, there's 80 jobs there full time. Then we start thinking about the little guy that comes to my mind when I was a principal. His name is Regan. His mom and dad are very much in that cycle. They try their best, alcoholism, drug abuse, and they try their best. And he shows up at the hockey rink, shows up at the hockey games with bad equipment, skates that don't fit, and he wants to play and be just like everybody else. But because his parents are caught in that cycle, he doesn't have that same opportunity to succeed, because we want nice skates for our kids. I said, I want my daughter to have dance lessons. I want our young football players to have the best equipment. But how do we do that? We do that with these darn jobs that people are bringing through our traditional territories and our territories. They're right in Chief Michael's backyard, Councillor Karen's backyard. They're there. And we need those jobs, but not just a shovel in hand. Give us some management jobs. Our people are in universities right now. From my First Nation alone, we have 57 post-secondary students. Costs us $800,000 a year to send them to post-secondary. And most of that is just, own income money, own economic development money that we use to do that. So as we go forward, I'll take those death threats any day of the week. As long as Regan can get new skates, if his parents can work on line 3, and if his parents can work at Kahio Fabco as welders, if his cousins can work as truck drivers and earn money through the opportunity that a lot of the people listening in right now on this webinar have the power, then help us, because we want to write that good story. I want Regan to be 18 years old in university on his way to be something. But if I was to bet right now, it's not going to happen, because that opportunity isn't there for his family. So we're trying our best. I'll take those death threats any day of the week if we can save that young man. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And it strikes me, yourself and Karen, who's a social worker, and yourself who is a principal, who see how badly these opportunities are needed, and all of Canada is responsible, like you say, to not give you a handout, but to give you a hand up and stop putting barriers in front of your communities from having those same opportunities that the rest of us take for granted. And Chief Francis, I know you have talked a lot about intergenerational wealth and having that and providing that for your communities and with the NLE communities. So how do you take the outside influence and the outside perspectives? And I know KXL was such a hot spot. How do you kind of manage those for your own self?
Well, I guess it is kind of a difficult question to answer, because really every day we face challenges. And as you become a leader, you be able to deal with challenges every day. And you better be ready to stand up for yourself and be ready to challenge anything and everything that comes along. I'm not saying physical violence in any way, but let's talk to each other to make sure that we understand that what maybe I can learn something from somebody who's an environmentalist, or a businessman comes to see my community to say, let's have a joint venture partnership. What I am trying to achieve here is to make sure that what I got to see as a young man, we weren't Treaty Indians until 1976. So what I got to see before 1976 is hard work every day to survive here in the Southwest, because we were almost forced out of the Southwest here. But with the survival skills that I got to see and be raised on, is to work hard every day. Now, as soon as 1976 came along and they basically started giving us welfare, that was detrimental to us. It almost got rid of a lot of people. That was very hurtful on us. But now it's upon me to reassure the young people I'm going to get you a job to make sure that you are actually going to be self-reliant. You're going to self-govern yourself, and you're going to work hard to earn whatever you're going to gain from all the right partners that are out there that are willing to participate with Nigani. Because that's always the most important part, is how do you make yourself self-reliant? How do you make your community successful? Because those challenges are there every day. Now, what you need to do is step up into your shoes, get up every morning and say, I'm going to kick some butt today. That's the way I look at life. Because without that attitude, you're not going to get very far. You're going to get pushed over, and you might get some sand kicked in your face. So every day, you must be able to tell your young people, this is what you've got to do to make sure that we're all going to succeed. I've always told my SA person, social assistant, I want to get rid of you. And guess what they tell me? What do you mean get rid of me? I want to get rid of your job. The social assistance is not good for anybody. So these challenges that we come upon as being a leader is to get out there and create economies, create our own GDP, so that to make sure that we can actually participate in mainstream society, and we're successful at it, to make sure that they get educated. Because like I said, these difficulties that we go through today, a lot of people don't know what we've been through. They can't even imagine what we've been through. But that has made me stronger, ready every day, every morning to get out there and kick some butt. It's not revenge. It's all about being equal. That's what it's about. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And I appreciate how all of you, despite what I know has been the flashback or the pushback that you've received, maintain such a healthy, constructive attitude, which I don't think most people would be able to obtain. And even the discussion is so polarized, but all of you come at it from such a balanced perspective. And I really appreciate it. And I just wish more Canadians could hear that perspective. So we'll go to my last question before I turn it over to the audience questions. And that was, based on your learn, what are the best practices? I'm sure, some things have worked out well, some things could use improvement. And when thinking about your engagement on pipelines or on future major projects that you might be part of, is there anything you would do differently in your relationship with industry that you would recommend going forward? And since, Chief Liberty, you've been stealing Chief Tapetet's thunder this whole time. Chief Tapetet, you can maybe go first this time, and then I'll go to Chief Francis, and then Karen, and end it with Chief Michael. So Chief Tapetet, what do you see as best practices in industry, and what do you want to see going forward?
Well, usually I'm a stickler for honoring my elders. So sorry, Chief Michael. I'll go first on this one. So, okay. So thank you for that question, Heather. So basically, probably the most important thing that we would do differently, like I said, in 2017 when I was elected, I was a teacher, then I was an infantry officer, then I did Afghanistan, came right into a principalship, and all I really knew was war, left flankings, right flankings. Then I went right into unit plans, lesson plans, parent-teacher interviews. And then 2017 happened and we got elected. And just like that, we're like, whoa, we're in charge. And we honestly didn't know where we were supposed to start. And like I said, through our band member, Des Dumais, who helped guide us through what a healthy relationship should look like, we didn't know. And luckily for him, he helped us. But the biggest thing we would do is around the word relationship. We don't need to be best friends. I don't need to be best friends with, all the companies, but we have to understand each other. So if you look on the picture right now that is behind my head, I'm really proud of that picture. That's me there speaking to my band members at a powwow. And I'm explaining to them some of the things that we're doing. And the relationship has always been a healthy one with my community. And yes, there's an opposition, but for the most part, there's a relationship there, whether you voted for me or not. That's there, but I respect that, and I still go to the person that didn't vote for me the same as I would for the one that did. And what I'm trying to say is, we want to invite all the prime contractors to our community. There has to be an understanding. We can't just be some First Nation that we're running a pipeline through the traditional territory and we give them a few jobs and we're going to make out like bandits and we're gonna bounce once it's all said and done. That's not how we work. Chief Alvin Francis says that they don't want to threaten any violence. I'll threaten violence. I don't care. Canada taught me how to fight as an infantry officer, and I'm not scared to go that route if I have to. But 99 times out of 100, most companies, they're like, no, we don't want to. We just want to have a relationship. So, but the relationship has to be more than just signing an LOI or signing a JV or signing some of those. It has to be come to my First Nation and see the people that you're impacting their lives on. You know, we want to explain success to these people. A lot of my people don't understand what it feels like to have $2,000 in their bank account biweekly. And we want to explain that could happen for years upon years through work. But I need the primary contractors to come and help explain that, right? Because we want to break that cycle. We need those jobs, but we need to understand each other. Did I know what Enbridge was about when we got started? Not really. I knew there was a pipeline that ran from 1968 from Hardisty goes down to Superior, Wisconsin. I kind of knew that, but I didn't know the bones about it. But, and I'm going to give Enbridge props right now because they listened to us and we said, we want some of the management jobs. They hired some junior inspectors that they were literally making $1,500 a day. That's more than I make in a week. And I said, how can that be? How the hell do you make more than the chief? And all my buddies, they all kind of laughed because they were showing me screenshots of their bank accounts. And it was life-changing. It was life-changing to them only because we invited Enbridge out and Enbridge come out and understood, hey, we can actually more than shovel and hand jobs, right? So that kind of, that's kind of what happened for us. And like I said, at the end of the day, on Kakawista, we just want healthy relationships. Let's make some money together, but keeping our young ones at the forefront and making sure that the environment is the be all end all. So thank you.
Thank you. Chief Francis, do you want to talk to us about what you have learned and what you think the best practices are or areas that you could improve based on your experience with pipeline companies and oil and gas industry?
Well, I always like to start out when I meet a partner, even TC Energy, I says, okay, understand who I am. Now, come and enjoy my part of my culture. So I invite them to a sweat. And then we come to our sweat, and then they really understand who we are because we suffer through these sweats. And we put ourselves through the suffering. And when they come out, they're just like me. I'll come crawling out of that sweat a little more balanced than they are. But then they understand, wow, you guys do this once a week or once a month? And he said, yeah, we do these quite often. So when we get to understand each other a little bit better as we go along and make these joint venture partnerships, pick the right one. Make sure they understand, are they willing to come to participate on your First Nation? Are they willing to come and have a sweat with you? Or come and enjoy a cultural day, meet your young people, meet your elders, invite them. Because if you don't have the right partner who's willing to come and participate with you, that's not the right partner. The right partner is willing to come down to your First Nation and say, let's have a day together. This way we can get rid of all those misunderstandings and we get to understand each other a little more as we go along here into the future, because we are the role models of today. So we have to show that we are still living and breathing our culture. Well, I understand your culture is to get educated, get a job, and do the best that you can. But they don't understand us most of the time. So we have to make that effort to make them understand who we are. And we have those young people who are willing to go and participate in the modern world, the big cities. Yes, we have to. We don't have a choice, because those talents that we go and gain, this education and experience that we gain from our joint venture partnerships, that enhances my First Nation, because they could come back with something that they've learned when after they've retired, they come home and all, but they'll always know and experience something that's different. And that's what makes us stronger, because every day we must get out there and be willing to challenge each other, whatever it be. You go to their world, go to your world, you come to my world. Let's be friends. Let's really understand who we are, who we really are, because we're a resilient people. And that's what the big thing about us is, that we've managed to live through so much, but we're still willing to understand and be peaceful, because that's what I have been taught. Many of my elders have always told me, get out there and make friends, make them understand who you are, and invite them to your First Nations, because those are the right partners to be invited into your house. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Francis. And I agree, it's so important. I think people just don't understand each other. And I know the business world is different from, you have different interests, but there's obviously some common overlap, between what First Nations need and want and what business needs and want. Karen, I'll turn it over to you. Talk about what you've learned in your deliberations with FNLNG Alliance and CGL.
Okay, well, I have a long-winded response to this, and it comes in different facets. And one of them is when I was the chief, what we set up for our own source revenue, once we start getting payments of any sort, we developed the 4-pillar system, because we hear all too often that this money just gets pilfered away. Members want lump sum payments and it's gone in a short time period. So we developed a 4-pillar system, and that was education and training. If we're going to succeed, that's one way we do it, is through post-secondary or trades and training. That's how we're going to do it. Language and culture. Like right now, we have 2 or 3 fluent speakers in our community. One of them is my mom and my aunt. Once they're gone, we're done with our fluent speakers in our community. So we really need to push our language and our culture. Health and wellness. If we're going to undo 150 years of oppression, it's going to take a lot of health and wellness for our people. Housing is always an issue. So those are our 4 pillars that we developed in our communities, so that when we get our own source revenue, that's where it gets put. And we continue to develop those whichever council gets in, those 4 pillars are going to remain. And it's about building the capacity within our community. The other thing, with the Alliance, it is about our people. I ask this question because both of these components are critical. If you had a choice to deal with the people or the land, both are important, they're critical. But if you had a choice to which one you're going to serve first, for me, it would be the people. Because we've gone through so much, we're resilient, but we still need to build the capacity. We still need to promote healing within our communities. We still need to promote education in whatever form that is. I believe that if we take care of the people, we can take care of the land. We need to be healthy individuals. We have to unwind those 150 years of oppression for our people. Our people must come first, because the land is always going to be here and we can always take care of it. That's our role as Indigenous people, is to be caretakers of the land. And we balance that. We can't take care of the land and have our people living in poverty. We must balance that. As leaders, that's our task. When you get elected in as council, what is our task? We get infiltrated with people with issues, social issues, housing issues, child welfare issues, health conditions. It's overwhelming. So we have to find the best path forward for our nations. And in relation to our experience, having dealt with pipelines for the first time, having a seat at the table, and I say that it is quite important. It's not only to have a seat at the table, but what is being served to you? Is it going to be benefiting the people? That's the question that we must ask ourselves as leaders. How is what I'm doing benefiting our people? That's the most critical question that we have to ask ourselves every day as we sit in leadership. What am I doing that is promoting, benefiting our community? That's the critical question. I think, having been in this for 8 years, I can look at some of the issues and start to make comments about them and how we can enhance them. I have maybe 5 or 6 points here. Relationship building. I cannot stress this enough, from beginning to end and beyond, to build a solid, trusting, and mutually respectful relationship with everyone. To know who you are, know your history of your people and the land, and learn about the extraction of the territory so that we can learn from that. You know, we don't want history repeating itself. You know, I think that's important. Understanding of the rights and title of Indigenous people. It is vital to understand this piece in order to move your people and your nation forward. If your people can work as a collective and be unified, your people will benefit from it. And I say this as a Wet'suwet'en Indigenous woman. Procurement opportunities. Ensure maximum benefits for the nation are in the short term and the long term. If Indigenous companies can form and become the prime contractors and have leverage to ensure that Indigenous-owned companies, First Nations economic development are in a driver's seat, I think that's important. Because right now we have prime companies, prime contractors that are leading the charge. And they're the ones who say, yes, we will work with this Indigenous company. So there's nothing stopping us from being those prime contractors. Ensure that these are written into the agreements. We need to ensure that all nations feel assured that the procurement opportunities are met and not have a ceiling amount into their project agreements. We need to ensure we build capacity within each of the communities with their economic development departments and organizations, because not every nation has a strong economic development business arm. We need to make sure that nobody gets left behind, that we think about those smaller nations that don't have the capacity. Let's help them to build that. BC can learn from the Yukon government. Nations should not have to beg for opportunities within their own territory. They should become partners on the projects. Employment and training opportunities. Start from the ground up. What does your community and nation need? Trades and training, do it as a collective. Industry, government, and Indigenous people making a tailored, solid plan to have our people into trades. When the project is over, they will have a trade under their belt. If at all possible, have a team on the ground in your community, ensuring we have employment counselors, education and training workers, industry and government working in collaboration to ensure 100% of our people are employed throughout the life of the project. Ensure that it is written into our agreements. The environment. I listened to one of our chiefs in the North region upset, telling us, sorry is not enough. We need to ensure that both government and industry are accountable across the board. When we have an environmental issue occur, that they are mitigated as best as possible until the Indigenous nations feel satisfied that it is dealt with the land being intact. If we are caretakers of the land, we take that responsibility very seriously. We need to implement land guardians now and beyond the project. Indigenous nations need to write their own environmental standards and legislate it. Equity ownership. We continue to hear it over and over again. Indigenous people need to access to the capital markets. The ideal picture would be that we all have sovereignty and our own self-governing system in place that is sustainable, so that we can borrow money and have capital assets. In relation to the Coastal GasLink pipeline, from my perspective, 7.5% isn't enough. I am grateful for what we have, but why not ask for more? We are worth it. Our people are worth it. This will address our socioeconomic issues. It will close that gap of inequities. Poor housing, poor drinking water, low levels of education. Healing from the intergenerational trauma will take 7 generations to complete. It is all our responsibility to do this. The return on investment has to be sufficient to sustain our communities. It must be a win-win-win across the board. Masai.
Thank you, Karen. And if you haven't already, I hope you publish that, whole thing, because I think many people would be interested in reading it, and it was so well thought out and so comprehensive. So thank you so much for that. And I hope I can see that again, because you really encapsulated so much of the discussions that we're having and what I hear Indigenous nations are wanting to see. And then last but not least, Chief Laborde, before we'll have a very quick lightning round of some of the audience questions. But please, Chief Laborde, what are some of the best practices that you have seen and things that you might have done differently if you were to start over?
Well, it's walk softly and carry a big stick. When Kinder Morgan, when Ian Anderson came here, we butted heads right away, right? He's a strong-headed guy, so am I. And cooler heads prevailed after we got to, we were sitting in a room, and I have a line of lawyers beside me. He's sitting across the table, and he has lawyers beside him. And I said, "Can I talk to you alone for a minute?" My lawyer said, "I don't recommend that." His lawyer said, "I don't recommend." I turned and I said, "Listen, you work for me, get out." And then he kicked out his lawyer. And he says, "What do you want, Chief?" I said, "I want you to invest in my community." I said, "We need, a new health center or a band office. I need you. My elders can't retire because we don't own our homes. They don't own their homes. They don't own their land. They have to work until they die. So I need investment in my elders. I need investors in education. I don't have enough money to send all my kids to school." And I said, "But most important thing is I want you to keep the damn oil in the damn pipe." I didn't say damn. And without a second later, he says, "I can do that." And so the lawyers came back in and we said, "We're not suing each other anymore. We're talking about an agreement." And what precipitated that was thinking on both our parts about communication and relationship, having a complete understanding of what you want. Right? We wanted investment in our community so our elders can retire in comfort. We wanted our kids to get post-secondary education that Ottawa doesn't pay for. Ottawa doesn't pay for welders. Ottawa doesn't pay for electricians. Ottawa doesn't pay for trades. And so those are the kinds of things that my community is interested in. And then Kinder Morgan, now TMX, we're going to invest in that. And so that's what we agreed to. And it was by articulating it in such a fashion that he got it, he understood it. And so, that relationship led to clearer communication, which led to understanding. Through our relationship, we didn't always agree. We still don't always agree. I'm phone him up and I text him when I'm getting pissy, and he does likewise. So, but what he needed to understand, him and his team, Reagan Schlecker is an amazing person. She's, we would talk about Indigenous history. We would talk about the Black Mountain Treaty that we have with the Okanagan. People don't realize they only learn about Canadian history. They don't learn Indigenous history. I have treaties with the Okanagan at Black Mountain. I have treaties with the Okanagan at Fish Lake. I have treaties with the Haida. I have treaties with Treaty 8. I have treaties with the Stoney Nakoda. And I have to honor those treaties in everything I do because we can't afford to break a treaty. And so this is what Canada doesn't know. This is what Canada doesn't learn. They learn about Columbus and Neil Armstrong and all that kind of stuff. They don't learn our history. We've been here for 10,000 years. We have a few treaties and a few relationships. And so those are the kinds of things that I think I found really important, was being able to articulate what it is that concerns you and what you want, and being able to share why. Because it's incumbent on me as leader of this community to look after those treaties that our ancestors did 7, 6, 5 generations ago. And so by having them be more inclusive instead of our lawyers fighting it out was better. So that he understood that all we want is equality. All we want is equality. Let's change the Indian Act so it reflects equality with the Canadian Constitution. And so once he understood that, it went very, very quickly to getting to an agreement. And so the best practices are relationship, communication, understanding. Once you get those understood, where we're coming from and why, it's easy to find a way forward, or easier to find a way forward. Good job, thanks.
Thank you, Chief. And there were a few questions that asked about negotiation. And I think you did help go some ways to addressing them. We only have a few minutes, but I wanted to get to some of these questions. Like I said, I think some of them have been addressed now as the course of discussion has taken. But there were a few questions about traditional knowledge. I'm going to put this to Chief Tapewatat and to Karen. I'll have a different question for you, Chief Laborde and Chief Francis. So Karen and Chief Tapewatat, how have you been able to incorporate or recognize traditional knowledge or protect protected sites, heritage spots, and that kind of thing as you've been negotiating? Because I know that's been important for both of you.
You want me to go first? Okay. Well, when I was the chief, we did traditional knowledge study that was inclusive of all of our elders within our community. And we did that in a way where we brought our elders out onto the land, into the territory, and we documented every site where our elders and our people fish, or where we berry pick, different areas within our territories. And we made sure that it was written into the final document that this is our traditional knowledge and our heritage sites that must not be touched, period. And so that was written with inclusiveness with our elders, and we the company still uses that yet. And so I think, you know, that document will be here whether we have different various major projects going through our territories. So, you know, we did this in a well thought out manner, making sure that, you know, we are addressing those environmental issues and concerns, and we are doing our best to preserve those protected sites that we hold sacred for us. So I think it's something that we just didn't nilly-willy sign on to and you know, let the company have access to all of our territories. No, we did this in a well-ordered fashion.
Okay, I'll just jump in there. I think my answer is not as it's not going to be a long one, but one of the things, you know, aside from the environmental studies, which are obviously really important, you know, our big thing, the aquifer that runs underneath us, it runs from St. Paul, Alberta down to Minneapolis, and that's kind of what we're always looking at, making sure we protect the levels of that and making sure that's always there. But in terms of when Line 3 went through, there was times where they came across artifacts in their digging, and we were always the first call. Our people were the first call. We were asked to provide elders on site to provide guidance in that. So for us, you know, on the cultural side, traditional knowledge, you know, we have to make sure that those are at the forefront. Now, I'll be really honest. I get a lot of heat from a few elders in our community because I'm always so economic development driven. You know, they always ask, well, what about our language? What about our culture? And if I do a self-analysis, which I do quite a lot, I know that we're not as strong as we need to be. We only have 2 Cree-speaking elders remaining of you know, 700 on reserve people right now, and those people are, you know, they're older in age, and they're going to be gone probably sooner rather than later, and that's a glaring defect on our part. But one of the elders once told me, it doesn't matter if you make millions of dollars, but if you don't have balance about who you are and where you come from, it's a no-win situation. And I've heard Councillor Karen say about balance, and Chief Mike and Chief Alvin about balance. So for us, you know, the traditional knowledge side, that is where the companies come in, if they can help us preserve that, because at the end of the day, it costs money. It costs things to preserve those. You're not just going to preserve language and culture, with $0. But that being said, we need that help, but we don't do it good enough where I'm from, and that's something that I can admit that, and something that we're trying to be better at. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And we'll go to our last question here, and it's a nice wrap-up way, and I'll pose it to both Chief Francis and Chief Laborde. But the question is from Mac Van Willingen, and he says, are you seeing progress and positive change? Are you optimistic about the future of your people? Are we seeing things get better? Chief Francis?
Yes, thank you. That is a very challenging question to answer because that's very diverse. So when you talk about all the many things that are happening in the world today, because there is progress in education, there's progress in our culture, but there is stuff that goes on in the real world that comes back to our First Nation, and it affects many young people. And it's sad that this is what is going on today. But in business, as we continue to open up the eyes of our young people and they understand what we're trying to achieve, they are starting to gather in numbers of where they're starting to believe in themselves and where they can actually say, we can be successful. We really can. So, and that's the most important part that I can see. And that's a great percentage of my young people who are saying this today, of where we can be successful, just like what the chief is saying. We got to stay in school. We got to maintain our culture. We got to maintain our language, whatever it is. Practice one word a day, or go to a ceremony. Go and listen to an elder. Go and talk to an elder. Make sure you ask the right questions. Those are the things that are most important to me. When it comes down to economic development, those things are slowly starting to build. So, and that's to me, that's the most successful thing we can do now, is enhance everything that we do as a First Nation. My First Nation has only got 542 people that are on the ban list, and I've got over 260 that live here. And we're a very small nation to those that live here. So we somewhat maintain a balance when it comes down to our tradition and culture. It's the economic development that we're kind of short of, but as we go along here, it's starting to build, and it's starting to get there where a young person now can come and ask, can I get a job now? How do I get a job? How do I get into a job? So we guide them in the right way where they can actually achieve something. And when they come home on weekends, guess what? They actually want to talk our language, which is Cree. So it's starting to get better. It's a slow thing, but it's getting better day by day. That's all I can say. So thank you.
Thank you. That reminds me of Karen's words that it'll take 7 generations, to build past some of the intergenerational trauma, but it's happening. So Chief Laborde, I'm going to give you the last word here. Are you seeing progress and positive change, and are you optimistic about the future for your people?
Yeah, for my people, yes, but there's a few fundamental things have to change. In Canada, the thing that has to change is the Indian Act. Before I was chief, I was a banker. I did small business loans, and I had 43 reserves in my catchment area. And so we can improve, jobs, we can improve small business, we can do all those things by tweaking with the proposals that we get from Indian Affairs. But if you want to see real change, we're going to have to become equals, right? In my community, yes, I've seen an increase in disposable income. Some of our guys have higher up jobs, higher management jobs, higher paying jobs. However, we are still locked out from wealth because we're not allowed to accrue wealth in our infrastructure, in our homes, all those kinds of things. While I was banker, I became involved with a group of people at the First Nations Tax Commission, and we developed the Tulo Center of Indigenous Economics. Now there we work with the Naitaho at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, and we work at the Hoover Institute in Stanford, down in the US. And so there we collect the ideology of how we had economies before, like the Indian Act. We had a robust economy. We had our own language. It was called the Chinook language. And so I would speak Shuswap and Chinook. Evan Tapatat would speak Cree and Chinook. Karen would speak Wet'suwet'en and Chinook. And so when we come together, we could talk about business, about trade, about relationships. All that was taken away with the Indian Act. And so we're trying to reinstill that by having a school and having people understand how to develop an economy in this landscape that we call Canada. So we can, I've seen improvements, but like Karen said, it's not going to get done by the next election. We need to change the Indian Act. I've been trying to change it since Jim Flaherty. And so it's incredibly, there's a queue. There's only so many laws that get amended every year. And so it depends on where you come inside the queue. And so what we're trying to do is change it so that approving projects will be sped up. I saw that in the lines. How do we speed up? Well, how do we speed up is by becoming equals. We're not equals. And so we're left to think about what happens if this, what happens if that, because we're not comfortable with that yet, as most Canadians are. And so we need to catch that up. And so we need that equality, and the equality comes from legislation.
Thank you. And great words to end this on. We've run out of time. I could listen to all of you all day, and I know our audience could too. We're getting so many positive comments, and I thank you all for those. This recording will be available in a day or two on the School Public Policy site. But just really from the bottom of my heart, you're all such inspiring leaders. You're doing great things for your communities, but you're also doing great things for Canada. And I appreciate that you've taken a hard road in many cases, and you have my gratitude and my respect. So again, thank you so much for participating. It's been my pleasure to have this conversation with you. And thank you to the School of Public Policy for hosting. And that will be a wrap up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Bye.
Goodbye.
See you, Evan. See you, Alvin. Bye, Karen.
Bye, guys.
Bye.